What's up? This is Brother Prodigy here, live and direct. And I would like to say shout out to everybody listening to these episodes on YouTube. And this episode that I really wrote about was or dealt with ignorance. And this is just my personal subjective interpretation of this Maya, this matrix, and its relation to ignorance. And I would also like to preface this episode by saying that a lot of the information that I'm getting for this particular episode is by a man named Dr. Philip Valentine. And if you get a chance, by all means, feel free to check out his YouTube channel. He's got tons of valuable information on his YouTube channel that he most greatly bestows upon us, so we can grow into a thorough knowledge of self, into a thorough knowledge of who we are, the divine within us, as us being that three-dimensional representation. So I would really like to give a shout out, really first and foremost, to him, because like I said, a lot of this information is coming from what he has taught and from what I've gained. And he's done numerous lectures on just about every topic you can imagine. Okay, and these are just basically a couple of things out of many things that I've gained with various principles and formulas. And I'm not going to necessarily parrot his information or anybody else's information for that matter. I basically use the principles that people teach and express what my understanding came to be in my interpersonal inception and projections. Okay, so this entry is going to be on ignorance, alright, and how it correlates with our existence and in relation to the divine. Okay, by divine, let me really define that really quick. Divine, I mean the absolute source of the first consciousness. Okay, the original consciousness that polarized itself in order to ask itself that proverbial question, which is, who am I? So basically that's who I'm in reference to. I'm not in reference to any religious denomination and or affiliation. Okay, now ignorance is really defined as, in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, as a lack of knowledge, understanding, or education. Okay, so ignorance, basically, I'm defining it as, in this episode, as a lack of knowledge, understanding, or a lack of education. Someone who's ignorant is someone who is in a specific state of unawareness. Okay, I mean, to exist is not necessarily the same as to know thyself, in my opinion. Nor does existence automatically infuse knowledge of self into your being. Okay, to exist is not necessarily the same as to know thyself, nor does existence essentially infuse knowledge of self into your being automatically. Ignorance and knowledge are really on two opposite points of a scale with an infinite expanse in between. It's my opinion. Okay, in this physical Maya, which Maya is defined as an illusion, a crafted illusion, or a crafted simulation rather, in this physical Maya, we are simply just beginning. Okay, we are near that first initial starting point of ignorance within matter, making progress through varying degrees of knowledge or awareness. Okay, all right, and these individuals are commonly called initiates. Okay, the initiates are the ones who make various degrees of progress through knowledge and or self-awareness, okay? Now, the want and need to reflect upon oneself, to me, is the catalyst. It's the questions that drive us in this physical reality towards true knowledge. Okay, true knowledge as opposed to a superficial knowledge or a superficial intellect. Questions like, who am I? Where am I? What am I? What's my purpose? What are my limits? We ask these questions because at a root level, those of us that are conscious know that this consciousness is a reflection of the divine, who is essentially seeking to perfect himself through knowledge of self in this three-dimensional reality. And while we tend to separate ourselves from any element of divinity because of religious indoctrination, true consciousness is not just self-reflection. True consciousness is not just self-reflection, but the divine consciousness seeking to understand himself, or itself rather, from a base root of ignorance. Okay, now I would just like to say that contrary to popular belief, God, quote unquote, is not, how we get these preconceived images of, and promulgated into our subconscious mind of God sitting in a chair somewhere, resting, all knowing. This is really an illusionary picture of the divine original consciousness established by religion. Okay, a God that rests in inertness is really a God that's dead. Okay, perfection is death. Perfection is death because there is no longer any movement or contemplation about oneself. There's no longer anything to know or to do. When you look at the element or the aspect of the divine or the original consciousness, it's constantly increasing in knowledge of self through experience, election, and direct observation. Okay? Things that perfection is really death, because upon perfection there's nothing more to know, nothing more to learn, nothing more to gain. Okay? And when you look at the aspect of the divine is constantly and perpetually growing and expanding, okay, and becoming more and more self-aware. Okay, we know this because we are doing the same thing. Okay, the old adage, as above, so is below. Okay, we know this because we're doing the same thing. When you look at the pleroma, which is a concept, okay, the pleroma, and when you look at ancient Greek mythology, because the pleroma is a concept that really I took from Greek mythology because it was probably ours first anyway, so I attach it to the pleroma is basically an expanse, or that initial primordial energy pool from where all things spring forth from. But I attach it to the infinite expanse of energy, really, that it's not really that much of a difference, but just little subtleties. I attach it to the infinite expanse of energy, really, that manifested consciousness proceeds from as it looks into the mirror and asks itself the proverbial question of, who am I? It's just like us, okay? When we get up in the morning, we look into the mirror, usually, okay? We look into the mirror, and when we look into this mirror and we see what we believe to be a reflection of ourselves, then we can at least gain a physical knowledge of self on the corporeal level, okay? Looking into the mirror, when I say the divine as looking into the mirror, I'm speaking of that as a metaphor to say that he in order for the divine, and I'm using he as just in a masculine sense, when the divine really, when the consciousness really, let me really think about how I can put this, okay? When you start to self-reflect, you go from really the I am to the being is being, existence, okay? You go to it from that perspective as wanting to know more about yourself, your limitations, your power. And in order to learn more about your knowledge, you must polarize or create the opposite, okay? In order to learn more about ignorance, you must learn, well, in order to learn about knowledge, rather, you would have to learn about ignorance, or ignorance would have to exist, okay? So for a divine, in order to learn the depths of your knowledge, then you must have ignorance. You must have that which is on the opposite side of the scale. Same thing with good. There needs to be evil in order to figure out or to comprehend or to gain knowledge of good. There must be evil, okay? There must be that opposite side of the spectrum. So whenever you're going towards or moving towards, or whenever you have a specific intent or are gaining knowledge of anything, there must be a certain level of ignorance, and that ignorance is where we're starting out now, okay? That ignorance is where we're starting out now. And what you see in the world is, you see not just a promulgation of ignorance, but you see the direct thwarting and quelching of ignorance. You see individuals deliberately keeping people in darkness and keeping people in ignorance, which is evil. So once self-reflection was created, ignorance was created, okay? Once self-reflection was created, ignorance was created. Polarizing of consciousness occurred. So the divine created ignorance in order to infinitely grow into perfecting knowledge of self, okay? Man is a base vehicle, okay? When you look at mankind, mankind is a base vehicle the divine really uses to explore these proverbial questions, okay? The process of evolving consciousness of the divine never ends. It can't end. And I will say it is my belief that it can be limited to a point, only because in order for the first consciousness, the divine, to experience and understand self in a third dimensional reality, it had to limit its own energy input output carrier signals, or it had to essentially limit its capacity of expression, okay, just due to the physical constraints. So when you look at Satan, because I'm using Satan as not just some religious mythical figure, but I'm looking at it as just an adversary, like in a game of chess. Satan's kingdom can only essentially exist in a hybrid material / spiritual reality like this one. Matter is where consciousness starts off at. It's when you look at matter is where consciousness starts off at in its peak of ignorance, okay, in a base position. Matter is Satan. Matter is Satan. Okay? Because it opposes the evolution of consciousness by the deception of material illusion. It's just the natural consequence of a low vibration. Okay? Those that dedicate themselves to matter are your adversaries, or are the adversaries of the ones genuinely seeking to evolve and step up to the next or their next experience. Okay? Those that dedicate themselves to matter are the adversaries. Okay? Those that stop or thwart the evolution of divine consciousness are your adversaries. Okay? That is Satan. So paradoxically, it's possible for unconscious man to enslave the divine through matter. And that's exactly what's happening now, is unconscious men and women are enslaving the divine, or elements of manifested divine consciousness in physical matter through matter. Through matter, okay? Through matter. So the resurrection of the dry bones is in us. Okay, we have that power, we have that capacity to promote and stimulate a resurrection. Okay. Now, not every person in existence is an aspect of the divine consciousness in self-reflection. Most people are products of the matrix, okay, and only know the matrix. So consequently, they are dead. There is also those that the divine has created in order to find out about, its capabilities in the third dimension. And consequently, if you need to find out about good, like I said before, evil must be created, okay? And evil needs to be, or evil would be, on the opposite end of the spectrum, seeking to really thwart spiritual evolution. Okay? So, while the divine did create them and is their author, they themselves do not evolve beyond the physical. Okay? They are but a program. Okay? An artificial intelligence. Okay? Programmed with base intuitive structures playing their role as a Satan. Okay? Ignorance, and this is important, this is key too, I believe. Ignorance and knowledge are forever separated. In hell is ignorance. We as elements of the original consciousness are continually seeking to resurrect ourselves out of hell, okay, which is this material reality, out of ignorance. So paradoxically, it can be said that God, quote unquote, willfully extended his consciousness into hell, metaphorically, to start an ever progressive journey into a knowledge of self. Our existence is essentially God interacting with itself in order to know itself. Okay? The evil that takes place within a controlled simulation to really answer the pervading question of who am I in 3 dimensions. Okay? It's a test with the ones having authority, the archons, the hollows, the artificials, entire people groups, whatever you want to call them. They are rather a creation for the purpose of the matrix, which is to grow out of ignorance. Okay, remember, this is base. This is the base level. Okay. Now, this brings along another all-pervading question, and that is, what do we do to get out of an endless cycle of successive reincarnations? And for those of you that want to get out of a cycle such as this, personally, I don't like using the word reincarnation that much. I would rather use the word experiences, but that's just my personal preference only, okay? And I would ask the question really rather, what could we do to get out of a seemingly endless cycle of successive experiences? You have to really power through, okay? And what I mean is each element of the original consciousness, you and I, okay, is trying to consume this matrix like how the roots of a tree consume the ground that they're in. Remember what I said earlier, and that is there's no such thing as positive stagnation producing positivity. Consciousness evolution is always a process of continual growth according to the one consciousness. And the true ones among us are branches off of that original tree extended into this ground or this reality which we call Earth. The beautiful thing about it is that we could all collectively as a people, as elements of that one consciousness, decide that this was enough, that we'd had enough, that we could end this shit right now. Remember, this is for our benefit. The moment we decide that we are no longer benefiting from this experience, we can collectively rise by way of knowledge gained and elevate to another paradigm. Not easily, however, because your adversary doesn't want this to happen. When I say adversary, I'm relating that title to extraterrestrials, archons, the ones that are deliberately manipulating our weaknesses in order to gain energetically, if that is such a word. But essentially, what we have to do is we have to maintain and power through, okay? And when you look at who we're up against, the adversaries, because their whole intent is to keep us in ignorance and to keep us from making progress, okay? So when you look at their whole intent, they work closely with other people groups and families on this planet, just like in chess, just like the white squares against the black squares on a chessboard, okay? You know, the intention of the archons or the extraterrestrials are to really divide consciousness and limit consciousness, okay? If you study closely, you have to see that this limiting of consciousness evolution is being orchestrated by higher beings who are trying sequentially to reprogram DNA to more adequately reflect the state of stupor. And this is what they're doing through the chemtrails, through the genetically modified foods, etc., etc. So just be on guard. Just really be on guard. And also, as a side note, they're really starting to turn up the fluoride content in water. So what I would recommend is I would recommend getting a water purifier, one preferably that purifies water through reverse osmosis, because that actually does take out the fluoride or reducing it to a great degree. So anyway, once again, I don't want to talk your head off, but this is just my brief synopsis of where I've been at the moment, where I've been lately. But for those of you out there, I'm good, I'm fine. I could be a lot stronger, I can't lie. I could be a lot stronger, a lot more focused, but in this matrix, it's tough. It really is tough, but that's no excuse. So once again, thanks for listening. If you've been encouraged by this information, excellent. Remember, the main objective your main objective, if you choose to accept it, is to progressively evolve and progressively gain knowledge. Okay?